So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and I did just have to abandon a recording because it was a night battle on Edoras, which there was no visibility whatsoever. At the start of the battle actually there was, but for some reason after that a blizzard came in and no light sources were actually working properly. So a little bit upset about that, to be honest with you, because it did mean that I wasted quite a lot of recording time before that became apparent that I just simply couldn't use it. So yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate, but we will be making a return to the Arthedain outpost instead of Edoras today as a result of that. It's been a little while since we've seen this, at least by the time this replay comes out, probably in early February at some point, since we last saw this one. And it's a good map as well. It's a fairly open fortress, but it's got plenty of really neat defensive positions, so there's things that the attackers and the defenders can do on it to really make themselves comfortable. So, it's not lore-friendly either, this one, but I have run out of lore-friendly battles that I haven't, on maps that I haven't done recently, so that's the situation I'm in at the moment. But I am recording quite quickly and in bulk at this point, so that's to be expected. But if you do have any more battle replays, do feel free to send them to me. After all, the best way to see something that you want to see on the channel is if you send it in to me yourself. So starting off with Demon's Hunt, who sent me this battle replay, sent me a fair few. Took me a little while to get around to this one. This one's an older replay of his, but he did send me this one shortly after I had already used the Arthedain outpost. It always seems to be the way. I always seem to use a map, and then all of a sudden I get sent another battle on it, even though I've only just done it. But he's playing as Lothlorien. He's got some Blades of the Wood, which are a lighter unit for Lothlorien. Also got some Lothlorien warriors, of course, with that AP, which is going to be useful against a plethora of factions in the game. Lothlorien Swordmaster is pretty much the other way round. They've got no AP, but much higher base damage, which is still very useful, of course. I mean, it really does depend on which one of these two units you want. It will depend on who you're directly facing off against. But if you're defending, of course, you're probably going to be facing multiple factions directly anyway. Blades of the Wood once again, some Lothlorien archers. Lothlorien well known for their ability to lay down a lot of punishment at range, which we saw last time on this map actually, because Lothlorien were defenders then as well. Watchers of the Golden Wood, Spears of the Wood, some Carascaladons Guardians, which are a fantastic unit of pikes, the tankiest units of pikes in the game certainly. And then back over here we also have some Kindred of Caliborn. Lothlorien players will very often bring both bodyguard archers that their faction is capable of bringing. We're going through the defenders first actually, breaking from tradition a little bit here, which is a little bit strange. We've got the Warius, who is playing as Mirkwood. He's got some Hiri Ek on the front, he's got some Blades of Emenduia and some Hiri Peng. He's set up a very layered stake defence, so there's no cavalry is going to be able to charge through here. They're going to have to walk through a relatively wide area, which is obviously going to open them up to plenty of punishment potentially from Mirkwood's archers. More Hiriak. We've got some more Blades of Emenduia. He's got other Emenduia units back here taking cover behind the buildings. And he's also got some Elders of the Elven King. Those silver thorns can be very useful, of course, as we've seen several times. Quite a lot of cavalry here as well, albeit it is ranged cavalry in the Bows of Emenduia. So it does offer you potentially a bit of manoeuvrability, but it does also still offer you that elven missile damage that people so often want to see. Then we have an evil faction in Rhudaur, played by Proxima Centauri. He's got some Rhudaur swordsmen just to help hold the line. Nothing too special, very functional unit though. Witch Realm Enslavers, with that big AP damage that they deal. Essenmoor's Troll Hunters with their javelin damage. Plenty of Harad pikes. They're a really strong unit this, but you do have to go into the red limit to bring more than one. They're sort of designed to be like an individual anchor in your line, so it does cost you if you want to bring more than just the one unit of them. Harad Berserkers as well, multiple HP shock infantry and melee. They also have that ranged attack. Rhudaur Marksmen, and that's pretty much it, although you see Black Walter hiding. I think Rhudaur Axemen are probably also hiding around here as well. Rhudaur have got plenty of units that can hide after all. And finally, Numenor, played by Sean of Gondor. He has got some Balagaya footmen. A few units here of the Numenorian cohort, some Narun Aru Sentinels, 2 units of them, so again going into the red limit on the elite pikes. Numenorian Shield Guard, armour-piercing spears, fantastic at holding a line. Balagaya pikes, and some Royal Legion of Armelos and Pharazim Swordmaster, so going very heavily into the ranged, or melee contingent I should say, of his army, and completely foregoing the ranged. There might be a unit of rangers around here somewhere, but actually I kind of doubt it, considering the way he set his army up. Could be to their advantage though, because it does look as though Mirkwood have dipped into more of the ranged units, so that could make up for deficits there. First of the attacking armies, we have the Warlord playing as Harad. Plenty of disposable units, plenty of AP, but fairly weak in terms of taking arrows. Southron Warband, of course, bit of AP, but the relative quality of the unit means they're going to need support if they're going to be effective. Fortunately, the dismounted Serpent Guard with the armour upgrade are pretty good, to be honest with you, especially with the dealing damage relative to other line infantry of a similar cost, and the armour upgrade does make up for the fact they do tend to have slightly lower defensive values than equivalent units. 2 units of Southron archers for skirmishing with the enemy. You don't see a Harad army without the trollmen over here because they're such an efficient unit at what they do, and any armour on the defence is going to want to steer well clear, any armoured unit I should say, steer well clear of the trollmen. Demons of the Desert are a devastating tool if you can get them into a really good position to use them, but the defenders will probably be on the lookout for a unit like that. Southron pikemen for anchoring the line, Champions of Nathrat for being just the souped up version of the trollmen that they are, and some beast hunters as well, so more standard javelins. Over on the other side of this little valley we have Dale, played by Y2K86. They should be pretty well suited for a skirmish fight. Dalian Royal Guard and Dalian Marksmen are here, as well as the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Be interesting to see if they can get a good shot onto an elite unit, because that's really what armour-piercing archers are all about. Lake Town Infantry offer a little bit of archery, but also being light infantry in melee. Barding Herd, Lake Town Pikemen, and some Dalian Spearmen are back here as well. Several units of the Dismounted Earls. The Dalian Paladins, of course, with really strong against armour. Swordmasters of Escaroth with the armour upgrade will put up a fight against the Elven units, to be fair. But we'll see how well they do. Then we have the Hobbit folk, played by Tweak. He has got some Proudfoot Protectors, unsurprisingly, because they're really the best unit of Hobbits in their roster by a long way. Crossbows combined with pikemen make for a really awkward unit to face, to be honest with you, but it can be done. Battling Brandybucks are here just in front of the tree line. We have another unit of Proudfoot Protectors. If you're going to go into a red limit on a unit in the Hobbit roster, it would definitely have to be them. We have some Ents, we have some Battling Brandybucks, and we have some more Battling Brandybucks. And then, finally, we have Arthedain, played by TC1351. He's got some men-at-arms, just a very rank-and-file kind of unit with the first level of armour upgrade. Numbers are often... You're going to need to build out your army in terms of numbers a bit when it's a 4v4 siege, so it's good that he's done that, albeit we'll see plenty of hobbits pop into view as well, I'm sure. Evandim Spearmen and Evandim Archers with their armour upgrades, some Arthedain Marksmen without them, some dismounted Fornost Arine Knights, some Arthedain Pikemen back here with the Numenor Gate Guards. Interesting to see when they get committed. Last battle we saw the Dunedain Peacekeepers brought in huge quantities, now they're brought in far more regular quantities, and some more Evandim Spearmen here as well. And that is pretty much that. So I think I will make a bit of a cut here actually, because on this map there is a tendency to allow a bit of a grace period so that the deployments, the armies that deploy out here, can get inside the settlement, and that will probably be the case here as well. If it isn't, then it'll be a very short cut indeed, but we'll see. I'll rejoin when the battle is beginning. So I'm going to rejoin the battle here because I'm not entirely sure when things are actually going to get underway, but it could be any moment now. And I'm going to rejoin now because there are a few things worth mentioning. You can see here that Dale are going to be peeling off with a portion of their army around here as Harad crests the hill as well. I thought there was actually going to be a little bit of interference run by Dale for a little while there, and I thought Numenor was actually going to turn around and meet them out in a more open part of the map, which would have been very bold. Not really recommended considering Numenor's lack of support. They only have an entirely melee focused army after all. But still, that would have been quite interesting. You can also see here from the front the Hobbits have moved into position. Dale are also over there. I mean, the Hobbits, to be fair, have actually spread themselves a little bit wider. Seems like neither Dale nor Hobbits want to be the first one into this particular choke point to face Mirkwood and a bit of Numenor infantry as well, but someone has to take that particular bullet for the team. And then over here you can see some Rhudaur forces. So of course the defenders are going to be mixing and matching their positions a little bit. Rhudaur taking the reins for the most part over here with some Arthedain Rangers over on that side there. And it looks as though actually as well Lothlorien have sort of completely swapped sides going over here. This was exactly what we saw in the last battle replay on this particular map. This was where Lothlorien were defending as well. Their infantry took a real beating actually in that battle, but their archers performed magnificently, which is perhaps what you would want to see if you're a Lorien defender. Your archers doing the business. But yeah, it's going to be quite interesting here to see, I think, how the attackers decide to open proceedings, because 4v4 sieges, it's much easier for the defenders because they don't have a completely overwhelming amount of troops. Like, The attacking armies do tend to be a little bit stronger in a situation such as this, and now we're going to see things start to get underway with the Hiri Peng opening up. But because they're smaller, they're more easily contained. And there go the Hiri Peng. Their arrow model, I think, is missing, which is why they're black. They're not poison arrows, I don't believe. You can see immediately. Looks pretty cool, actually, but opening up on the Dalian Bowman. The Dalian Bowman with the armour upgrade here are a really good archer in a skirmish fight, but they need to be in range, so they're returning fire first. And they would still lose, of course, to elven archers such as that, but that's just the way of things. Woodland Realm Patrol revealing themselves, firing into the Lake Town infantry. In fact, everyone's arrow mod seems to be missing. Just black projectiles, which is kind of weird. Longbottom mob getting into position and throwing their pebbles, being pushed up in the vanguard, which is an interesting choice. To be fair, against these lightly armoured elves, that's where the pebbles will probably be most damaging, but the kind of damage that the Woodland Realm Patrol will be throwing back at them will be substantially higher. Fire arrows being utilised, trying to break some of the entry-level Dalian units. Hobbits are the kind of units you could break fairly easily with some sustained pressure of that kind, especially if they don't send up any elite units here to give them a bit of a hand. I like the fact that Tweaker's decided to take it upon himself to be the first ones into the gap, but Y2K is going to need to support him with some slightly bulkier units than the Hobbits can provide here. They're numerous, the Hobbits, but if you can bottle them up, they can start to encounter difficulties. Meanwhile, over here, Southron Warband, not entirely sure what that frame rate's all about. Hashari moving forward, trying to utilise their projectiles on the blades of the wood. Interesting to see this, actually, because I think Lothlorien going up against Harad is the best choice, because their archers will be very effective against the more lightly armoured Haradrim troops, but also the armour piercing of the Haradrim is not going to be quite as useful against Lorien as it would be against, for example, Numenor. So I think that, whether that was something planned or not, it is still a good idea. They need to get some of their reinforcements ready to move forward as well, I think, but we shall have to wait and see on that. Going to be a slow burn of a battle initially, I think, this. Probably going to be one of those battles where there's one truly decisive moment in the fight where the attackers decide to throw a lot more forward. Farmers of Buckland, again, the Hobbits do tend to have a bit more of an affinity for armour piercing, which is not going to be as useful against Mirkwood. The Spears of Emondwyr holding back the Farmers of Buckland, as the projectiles once again being traded between both sides. Considering it is a 4v4 as well, the attackers can't take it for granted that their archers are simply going to be able to outlast the enemy archers, and they will have guaranteed ammunition by the end, because that may not be the case. Banderbrass archers are up to a little bit more than the Longbottom mob, and they probably will actually do a fair amount of damage to lighter elven troops if they are able to hit. Maybe not so much if they're firing directly up into the air, such as that. What are they actually going after here? Woodland Realm Patrol? They're getting moved out of the way by Mirkwood. What are the Hiri Peng shooting at, I wonder? Wonder why the arrows are black. It's an interesting bug. They are going after the Earls of Dale, who from the front, high armour values, they're shielded. They will be able to absorb more punishment, but they are a stronger unit, so any kills you can get would be really rather useful. Arthedain now kind of need to begin some sort of forward motion as well, I think. As much as attacking into a Rhudaur army is kind of a nerve-wracking experience if you're a faction which relies on armour, both because of Rhudaur's melee options and, more worryingly, their ranged options, I think, with their javelins and throwing axes and rangers. You will have to bite the bullet at some point and move in, and considering your allies are already doing that to varying extents, that time may be now. It's actually easier to see the arrows when they're coloured like this. It's easier to keep track of all the projectiles as they flit across the screen. Spears of Emondwyr. This initial unit that was sent forward is being killed off by the battling Brandybucks, but there's plenty more where that came from. Plenty of Emondwyr units available for holding the front line, which is perhaps what you would expect, having to dip into some of the more entry-level offerings due to it being a 4v4. Meanwhile, Southron Warband are here, some dismounted Earls. Southron Warband, Dalian Bowman trying to do some damage. I mean, to be fair, even from the front, they may be shielded, but they are a lighter unit. You will get more damage done, but you would probably be better served shooting at something else. Ammunition being utilised, I think, on the pikes. It would certainly make sense, because elven arrows will absolutely massacre Southron pikemen, and even if you don't hit the pikes, you're going to hit something over here, so it's definitely a viable target, in my opinion. Here Panger there. Battling Brandybuck's defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle, now that the main body of the Mirkwood front line is engaged in melee. This fight turning around somewhat. Woodland Realm Patrol. There are the Hiripang. More hobbits moving forward, so still not really any Dalian presence on the front line, which I think some sort of... I was actually thinking the Dalian Spearmen, but this is a little bit more like it. With some dismounted Earls on the front line, it gives some much needed rigidity to this assault. There's plenty of numbers when you're dealing with the hobbit folk, but individually they're going to take a lot of punishment at the hands of Mirkwood archers in particular, because of how damaging they are. Pushing up some bulkier Dalian units, like I said, would really help matters over here. Still nothing happening on the front between Rhudaur and Arthedain. Still content to trade insubstantial blows with one another, which the Rhudaur defenders will be all too happy to see. And over here, still the sense that they're trying to skirmish here, the attackers. I think this is the kind of map where you can skirmish, but you can't do it exclusively. You need to be putting pressure on the front line. As nerve-wracking as seeing a position like this is, with Lorinard archers ready to shoot you in the back, even if you do end up making progress, you're still sat in range of the defenders here, and you're still taking punishment. Maybe not on units that are super important to your cause, but manpower is important if you're the attackers. Another volley coming in here. Blades of the Wood, some of them getting substantially bloodied up, but again, the losses being incurred here, not too devastating. Over here, meanwhile, a little bit more like it. Plenty of hobbits on the front line. Dalian units moving forward in formation as well. Mirkwood having to reorganise their front line, but they have assistance on hand from Numenor. Donkey pikemen indeed, and a couple of them getting hit there by arrow fire. Longbottom mob using their pebbles as well. But again, very heavily armed and shielded. Of all the pikemen in the game, they're the most resistant to arrow fire. Carascaladon's Guardian's probably a little bit more so actually because of that second hit point they have, but that's a special case. Belagaya pikemen gonna move in. Definitely the most active front line by far. That does mean, of course, the defenders can siphon more resources off here to defend at this point with a little bit more vigour. Arthedain starting to get a little bit closer to the Rhudaur lines. Proxima Century doesn't need to be too impatient here. All he needs to do is keep holding his formation and he will be fine. Especially Rhudaur, considering the amount of numbers they have at their disposal. Meanwhile, Hiriek also forming up the front line now, so some of the bulkier Mirkwood units. Excuse me. In come the Ents. The Ents will do decently against the spears. Especially against the spears of Amenduir, because they will take a lot of damage. Excuse me. That's a sign that my voice is finally starting to give way to the amount of recording that I'm doing. But fortunately this is the last one of the week. Let's hope it can last until then. Ugh. Apologies. But yeah, the Ents, they'll do decently against these kind of units actually, even against the Narod Sentinels and Hiriak. They're not the kind of units that tend to do well against the Ents. The key though is sending up units in support of the Ents that will be able to sort of solidify these gains. I mean, at least they're sending up something in the battling Brandybucks, but I'm not sure that's going to be quite substantial enough. I think it would have to be on Dale to send up the kind of units that would be necessary to really keep this train chugging down the tracks. Battling Brandybucks are also taking rear fire arrows as well. Really trying to make sure these Ents don't get any further Blades of Amenduir. Again, maybe not the best unit for dealing with the Ents, but at this point they will just be overwhelmed by the sheer numbers that are all around them. Meanwhile, are we seeing the beginnings of a melee engagement over here? We are, a significant one as well. Southron archers firing into the supporting units that Lothlorien have in behind their very thin line of Blades of the Wood. Out of ammo Dalian bowmen and Southron warband are the ones leading this particular assault. You can see that they are attracting the attention of the Lorinard archers up on the cliffs, and reinforcements heading for this front line as well. a unit of Spears of the Wood to try and make this front line last just a little bit longer. There was a charge animation there, which is kind of interesting. Hashari, whether it be using their projectiles or just being in melee, they are a deadly opponent. They've got that bug as well where their swords seem to dance around them. Foul sorcery indeed, but they're also uniquely vulnerable really to elven arrows, and I would imagine the Lornand archers are probably going to shoot them immediately. Post haste? No, actually they're not. That's interesting. Allowing the Hashari to potentially get some volleys off. He's trying to here, the Warlord. He's trying to get his units into a good position. We shall have to wait and see. Meanwhile, back over to the central front. Woodland Realm Patrol, again, dousing this front line with fire arrows. The Ents are doing their best here, but they will flicker out here any moment. There's still a few of them alive, but they're not really... They're kind of cut off from their main army at this point. They do need some more reinforcements, I think, on the front line at this point, the defenders, but this is still a situation which is very advantageous for them as long as they're willing to bring forward more reinforcements. And Numenor should be able to do that. I mean, Reforged javelins are over here as well. Wardens of Ammon Lang, plenty of missiles they can use at their disposal, but we'll see. There is a possibility here for the attackers to actually push through while the defenders are still trying to organise themselves, but that time window is rapidly closing. Especially when you're talking about something which can deal as much damage as Reforged javelins. That is a bad thing. Proudfoot protectors getting into place to firing with their crossbow bolts. They're going to do a lot of damage actually to Wardens of Ammon Lang, and they're a useful unit at range and in melee for the defenders, so it's a good choice. They're not the easiest unit to kill off at range either because of the slightly bulkier nature compared to many of the hobbits. Reforged javelins firing in there. Again, you can see elements of the hobbit army looking like routing, especially under javelin fire. Going to need more reinforcements on the front line here. The attackers, defenders bringing across some more reinforcements, which is worrying. So they've got the situation under control, which means they're going to have to try and make their gains elsewhere. To be fair to Arthedain, they are having to face this choke point all on their own, but Rhudaur is so far holding on. Rhudaur swordsmen sending a pack of Evendim archers fleeing for the hills. Arthedain men-at-arms 1-to-1 should be able to defeat Rhudaur swordsmen, but the key here is range support nearby and pikes that can potentially roll forwards as well. Really, I think it has to be over here where the attackers need to be most proactive, because they have Harad, but Dale is not only elected to support the hobbits, but they're also supporting Harad, so I think this is actually the key engagement on the field here. The attackers need to make headway through this region quickly, because I don't think they're going to win on the other two choke points if the winds don't change. So they need to be a little bit more, needs to be a bit more urgency over here, and it's surprising that this is the choke point they've elected to try and focus on, because it's the one that has the best skirmisher positions for the defenders to utilise, and it's Lothlorien over here, so I'm not entirely sure that this was the correct call, but seeing as it's the one they've made, they now need to be aggressive. More aggressive than they're being anyway. Because over here they were aggressive actually, but it was the entirety of the Hobbit army and also only a portion of the Dalian one. You can see over there the Dunedain Rangers from the Hobbits firing their body-piercing projectiles in and tearing through the Wardens of Ammon Lang, actually doing a fantastic job. So a lot of the support for the defenders has actually been dealt with relatively well by the attackers. The problem has been, however, that Numenor's strength at arms in melee has been brought to bear, and the front lines have held reasonably well. Very, very key. Barding Herd arriving on the front line as well. Not many of them though, they could have actually routed and come back. They're resilient for a halberdier unit as well, to be sure, but again, armour piercing, useful against Numenor, not so much against the Mirkwood units they're primarily facing on that part of the line. Hobbitry and arms, again, probably returning from routing because there's only 83 in that unit. Do they have much left? Lake Town pikemen are miles away. They need to be a little bit closer for me. The hobbits are really exhausting themselves here, but I think Tweak, to be fair, it's not the wrong choice that Tweak has made. I think it's elsewhere where the attackers need to be a little bit more all in, a little bit more of an aggressive mentality. Lorinard warriors going up against the dismounted Earls of Dale. That's going to be a pretty poor matchup for the dismounted Earls, to be sure. The only elven faction to invest in a two-handed axeman unit, and that can really help them an awful lot. Let's see. Woodland Protectors were firing along the line as well. There is a few dismounted Serpent Guard, but they're already shaken. This front line needs more assistance. They could push through sections of this line as well, which is why I'm a little bit surprised they're not already doing so. Watchers of the Golden Wood are ready to shoot anything that approaches, which they see as high value enough, so they're probably looking at the Trollman, or the various units of Trollman, which is fair enough. Meanwhile, it's looking, I mean, to be fair, it's looking not terrible for the attackers over here, but the defenders will be able to slam the door shut in their face if they commit the Numenorian shield guard at some stage, which they're going to do right now. The armour piercing will also be especially helpful against any Dalian units which do now come forward. Maybe not so much Keldon River Patrol, but yeah, I mean, most of the Dalian infantry, dedicated infantry anyway, has been already dealt with. Banderbrass archers reveal themselves. This is the thing about the Hobbits, you never quite know when they're all gone, because they seem to have just more and more hidden units that they pull out of nowhere each time. Meanwhile, once again, Arthedain making limited progress. Really kind of a footnote of an engagement in this so far, which Rhudaur will be absolutely fine with. To be fair, I mean, it is the Rangers that are up on that hill which I would be concerned about, but it's an unavoidable thing. At some stage, if the defenders are playing their cards right with the way Rangers work in the game at the moment, they will be able to do a ton of damage to you. Victory seems certain. So, Nvidia updates means it's actually a full day later, if you noticed a very clear jump cut there. But we are now back, and I do remember exactly where we were because the Hobbits are starting to flag a little bit. The Dalians are still here in support of them, but perhaps not in the numbers that they need to be. But there are still some decent supporting units in here. The Dalian Royal Guard and the Proudfoot Protectors. The Banderbrass Archers as well are actually capable of dishing out a fair amount of damage. However, for the most part, the defenders should be absolutely fine holding on to this front line with the continued reinforcements of the fully infantry-based Numenor army. It's looking like that is a decision which has paid dividends. Trying to coordinate your compositions like this can go awry if you're not communicating with one another properly, but I think it's a fair assumption if you're playing alongside Lothlorien and Mirkwood. The archers are probably going to be sorted out by your team, so you could perhaps risk going for just a fully infantry-based army like Numenor has here. Meanwhile, like I said, this is where the attackers do need to start making some ground, I think, because Dale has made the decision to support this push to a fair degree. The fact that they sent units over here at all means that this is the choke point that they would appear to be going most heavily into, the one that Lorien themselves are guarding. But with units, well actually those aren't Lorenan Swordmasters, those are out of ammunition archers, but even then, heavy elven units like that are always going to be decent in melee, especially when you're talking about lightly defended units such as the ones that the Haradrim are trafficking in here. Also got some upgraded Serpent Guard coming in. They'll do slightly better, especially against the entry-level Lorien units, but still, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for the attackers here. Over on this side of things, Arthedain have really made no progress whatsoever, to be honest with you. Rhudaur have just held their ground, and Arthedain have been kind of powerless to stop them from doing that. You can see the Arthedain marksmen here suffering, mainly because Rhudaur have got plenty of numbers with their archers, and they've got the superior terrain as well. So this is the kind of skirmish fight which is going to go pretty well for them. You want to keep your Trollshaw axe throwers out of the line of fire from any of the Arthedain archers, but you can see over here Arthedain trying to play the long game here, but by the time this game reaches its conclusion they may find they've waited too long to actually do anything, as unpalatable a situation is charging into a Rhudaur pike line which is backed up by javelins, axe throwers and rangers. Sometimes you have to try and take one for the team and try and make something happen at the very least, because Rhudaur have been able to send over more and more infantry to the middle here, which has completely shut the door in the face of an attempted aggressive push from the Shire, with a bit of that Dalian support, and now you're coming down to the very dregs of the Hobbit infantry. You know you're struggling when you're relying on Keldon River Patrol to try and do the business for you in melee. Elders of the Elven King still have ammunition, which is bad news for all of these phalanx units from Dale, especially the Lake Town pikemen. They're going to take tons and tons of damage at the hands of those elven bowmen. If they get those Proudfoots into position, though, they could again shoot into them in the same way that they did with the beleaguered Wardens of Amon Lank over here. And yeah, at this point Rhudaur feels quite comfortable indeed sending over stuff like Trollshaw axe throwers as well. If you're paying attention on the map, this is when Arthedain absolutely should be moving forward, because more and more of Rhudaur's resources are being committed elsewhere, which means you will have less to deal with, but if you leave it too long, it's going to be bad news bears for you. These lumbermen are always going to struggle against elves like this because of their really poor melee defense. Elves are going to carve right through it, and axe to axe here, a very lopsided fight indeed. Tons of damage done here to the Haradrim. Watchers of the Goldenwood still just waiting there in the background. I'm surprised they haven't been moved forward a little bit closer actually. Lothloriens still have Karas Galadon's Guardians as well, so they're going to have the ability to hold a secondary line should they choose to. And to be honest, they may actually be better served allowing the attackers into the settlement on this side and then shooting them in the back here with their Watchers of the Goldenwood if they move them back over to there. And the Kindred of Celeborn. But I think from this position in the fight, it's hard to see how the defenders go on to lose it, to be honest with you, because they've managed their resources well. They've backed one another's choke points up when they've needed to, and the attackers just haven't had the oomph to get through. And that's not because they played particularly poorly, I just don't think they've had the resources necessary to do it. Elders of the Elven King, I was going to say Kindred for a second then. They're taking a bit of damage there. Taking some hits. Proudfoot Protectors crouching down amidst the bodies. A javelin volley thudding into the Numenorian cohort. So Numenor very much being the anvil to the hammer of all of these projectiles that are coming in. Those Trollshaw axe throwers will have thrown a few decent volleys in, but to be fair, the Dalian Paladins, multiple HP, very heavily armoured. They will be able to absorb axe thrower fire a little bit better than most, even without a shield pointing in the right direction. And to be fair, the Dalian Paladins as well are a really good choice of unit for sending up against these Numenorian ones. But they're going to need more support than this. They're very strong individually, but there's not enough of them to get the job done all on their lonesome. And to be fair, Dale is now committing forward more men into this fight. The issue is I think this is probably a little bit too little too late. They do have black shots back here. Dunedain Rangers, they've still got a bit of ammunition if they can get into a good place. Who knows where that could take them. Trollshaw axe throwers have already done some pretty good work. Rhudaur's still over here. You can also still see the cavalry. If they can get out into the open field, I think if they can outright defeat the Hobbits and Dale, they could then get out into the open field with their bows of Emenduir. And even if their horse archers charging into the back when they're out of ammunition could still be very advantageous for them. You can see over here, Rhudaur have got a real skeleton crew over here, and Arthedain is still not eager on moving forwards, and still these Rhudaur marksmen able to pick and choose their targets, still able to slowly pick away at the Arthedain manpower. They have at least tried to attack Arthedain, but they've lost their bottle every time. And it's not as if it's just pure Arthedain bodies here either. I mean, they were doing damage to those Rhudaur swordsmen. One of the Franodyne pikemen does fall. There are Dunedain Trollslayers in here. I mean, this is a good move. Dunedain Trollslayers moving forward. They seem to have gone unnoticed by the Rhudaur skirmishers. So they're going to get in here and try to pummel on these Franodyne pikemen. They need to get this damage done quickly, and then they need to try and push through this line as fast as possible. Attenmore's Troll Hunters are going to get some counter fire in here now though as well. And those javelins will do their grisly work. Meanwhile, over on the other side, still some Dalian units in the background over there, the laser-like projectiles of the Watchers of the Goldenwood going after the Trollman. Not a particularly surprising target that, but Lothlorien can tend to hold on to this particular choke point instead of allowing them in so they can shoot directly into the backs of the enemy units, pushing up the Lorenan Swordmasters. Interesting clash this actually between the Trollmen of Harad and the Swordmasters, because the lack of armour means once the hit points are gone, those Swordmasters will do quite a lot of damage indeed. Problem being though that the Trollmen will also do quite a lot of damage in return, but that's going to be the key here. The melee fight is really secondary to the fact that these Watchers of the Goldenwood, they just ran out of ammo actually, but definitely doing a ton of damage there with their Silver Thorns into advantageous targets as well. Swordmasters of Esgaroth moving forward, they'll do better against the elves than most of the Dalian units, but will still find themselves outclassed in the swordsman department by the Lorenan Swordmasters. A couple of units in behind enemy lines. The Shire worming their way back here. They're going to be intercepted by some axemen and be defeated ultimately, but those axemen are exposed for the SAURON archers to pour a few volleys in there. Meanwhile, back over here, still Numenor holding on to the front line. Not enough paladins left now. Very light Dalian troops, all that really remains. The Dunedain Rangers did still have ammunition, but unsurprisingly, they became a prime target for archers. Namely, I think it was probably the bows of Amenduia back there, the horse archers actually. But to be fair, I mean, they do still have some good supporting units here, Dale and the Hobbit folk. But in terms of their melee capabilities, it's not going to be enough anymore. Those black shots taking hits from what? What are they taking hits from? They're definitely getting shot by something. Ah, from looping shots. Where are those? There they are. Elders of the Elven King. I mean, they're not going to do tons of damage like that, but they are still doing damage at the very least. Bows of Amenduia can move forward to do the same as well, because the black shots and the Dunedain Rangers at this point are the only things you really need to worry about. Dalian Royal Guard are all well and good, but in melee they're only one unit. And they've probably used up a fair amount of their ammunition already. Meanwhile, Reforged Javelins, another assault from Arthedain. They did actually manage to squeeze around the defensive line with this very depleted unit of Arthedain men-at-arms, but they were immediately dealt with by the Admiral's Trollhunters and the Reforged Javelins, two javelin units which are very capable of looking after themselves in melee, especially the Reforged Javelins against armoured line infantry. And they're going to try and do the same now, working up the line. It really hasn't worked out for Arthedain at all well in this fight, but I don't think they can have too many complaints because of the way they've decided to set themselves up. Like, even if they'd ended up losing, I think they would have been far better off just going all-out aggression in this fight. Because at the very least it would have stopped Rhudaur from sending units over to the middle, and to be honest with you, the addition of those Rhudaur swordsmen and Trollshire Axlers may have been the difference maker. Without these units, and Ettenwall's Trollhunters, without these units, I think stuff like the Blackshot Dragonslayers and the Dunedain Rangers actually would have been enough to make a significant difference against Numenor. Maybe not significant enough to win them the battle overall, but we'll never know now. These things can snowball in a battle to the point where you can't really extrapolate what would happen if things had worked out differently. The Kindred are now in position, having utilised all the ammunition on the Watchers of the Golden Wood. They're still not making tons of progress over here. Lorinand archers holding onto the front line. Trollmen should be enough to get through the Lorinand archers at the very least, especially with the support of those Esgaroth swordmasters. And the Trollmen are winning, which surprises me, to be honest with you, given the amount of swordmasters that still remain and how bloodied they are. I imagine when more and more of the hit points get dealt with, that will flick back in the other direction. So Lothlorien holding on to this line still. Sending forward the champions of Nafarat now. There's still a couple of Dalian and Haradrim units in the distance over there, but running on fumes a little bit now, the attackers. There's still a fair way in this fight to go though. It's not as if we're entering the final phase and the attackers are on the verge of complete collapse. That may have something to do with the fact that Arthedain haven't been that aggressive and they have still got some units left that they can utilise. Blackshot Dragonslayers firing away. What very little remains of Dale being dealt with on the front line. Naru Sentinels as well. Always a bit of a concern. And more Trollhunters fighting on the front line against the Bandabrass Archers, who are apparently enough to defeat them. That's kind of surprising. I think it's because they've got those armour-piercing clubs, but I imagine this is going to be one of those fights that will probably flick around, because the Bandabrass Archers aren't the most bulky unit. There goes the Hobbit General. Slain by some Numenorians. Though to be fair, the Admiral's Trollhunters are spears, so they're not going to do much damage either. Interesting little fight that, but the important thing is just that they've got all their bases covered here, the defenders. And Dale having to move backwards and try and kite a little bit with their skirmishers. More and more of a focus is going to come onto Arthedain here, because they do need to push forward with some intent at some stage. These Evendim Spearmen, again, this one unit of Harad pikemen, in spite of taking a bit of damage from ranged sources and the like, they have been holding this line down pretty well. We've got some Rhudaur marksmen just in here to give a bit more mass to the front line. Not a ton of damage going to be dealt with by them, of course. And they're going to try and squeeze around the sides once again, this time with a much more substantial unit of Dunedain Peacekeepers. And they will make it. Admiral's Troll Hunters, will they get a volley off point blank? They're getting their javelins ready. I think they will. You know, the Peacekeepers hesitated for a moment there, and in the end they ended up taking some fairly substantial losses. They're behind enemy lines as well without support, so looking pretty grim for them. Rodram Javelins will also be able to surround them, and at that point, caught between the two units, I imagine the Rhudaur Peacekeepers will fall away. They'll do very well against the Ettamor's Troll Hunters, to be fair, but less well against the Rodram Javelins. They're squeezing around the flank now, though. They see a bit of an opportunity to come through, and the Ebondim Spearmen will be actually able to engage with the Rodram Javelins and perhaps stop them from getting there in support the Dunedain Peacekeepers. Forward come the Dismounted Knights for Numenor as well. This is a good opportunity for Arthedain. They do need to try and capitalise on this, in my opinion. There are the Rhudaur Berserkers. I also saw Black Wolves. Are they hidden around here somewhere? Yeah, there they are. So Black Wolves and Rhudaur Berserkers can move in to support this position, which they will need, I think, actually, Rhudaur, interestingly enough. It's about time. And then over here, still the Band of Brass Archers winning against the Ettamor's Troll Hunters. Goes to show what a difference AP can make. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's still a very significant factor. Dale, with their skirmishes, are forcing Numenor to move backwards. Numenor were victorious there, they just didn't want to get kited into the open field by what remained of the Dalian skirmishes, which is completely understandable. That is really, really nasty, that, from the Kindred of Celeborn. Hashari have managed to get in behind enemy lines again, though. And, you know, to be honest, they have managed to make a little bit of progress at this point, the attackers over here. The Hashari trying to move forward, they're being blocked by woodland protectors. Kindred of Celeborn can take their pick, though, really. There's plenty of targets in there that would be good. Swordmasters of Esgaroth, Champions of Nafrat. All of those split-shot projectiles are going to hit something. And even if it does end up being Sautron archers, they're going to clean up in terms of kills there. Probably the one archer I'd still be worried about causing a crash, to be honest with you, the Kindred of Celeborn, with the fact they still have that blood spray. Karas Galadon's Guardians moving forward, trying to shore things up. Naryn Irish Sentinels will move forward as well, a brutal pike block that could end up being. Serpent's Fangs are back here as well. Again, with Numenor and Lothlorien, the poison projectiles are not really going to have the kind of impact that you would want them to. But if you can pick out the right targets, the damage that they can do is still going to be useful, and then the Serpent's Fangs themselves are still useful in melee, a bulky unit. They are actually getting in here. Oof. That was devastation of some description. Was that the Demons of the Desert? No, there's Hashari Stalkers there, so some attacking rangers. Where are the Demons of the Desert? Are they there? Oh yeah, they are. That must have been friendly fire then. I mean, to be fair, they must have absolutely devastated this front line of Lorien. Definitely doing the right thing there. Karas Galadon's Guardians getting absolutely hammered by the Demons of the Desert. Immediately noticing this problem, the Kindred of Celeborn turn their bows onto the demons, but it's too late really. The demons have got into position and they've managed to do a ton of damage to that front line. Their multiple HP saved them from the first couple of volleys from the Kindred. Now though, they're getting shredded. Not the end of the world though, you've still got Numenor in here ready to put up a front line. Dale's skirmishers have managed to get into the settlement as well though. So potentially a bit of a change in the winds here. With Arthedain still having a genuine army left and actually pushing forward in numbers now, the attackers could turn this around. That Demons of the Desert volley could be absolutely vital, because with Karas Galadon's Guardians and a plentiful supply of Loren-armed infantry holding that attack back, I couldn't see how they were going to break through there, to be honest with you, but the demons being used to very good effect. Greenwood Rangers on the defence is always a sign that you don't really want to see, but they've got their blades out, so they probably used up their ammunition on the central choke point, to be honest with you. So the sacrificial lamb in this fight may very well have been the Shire. It's not a glamorous job, but someone has to do it, as I keep saying. Absorbing all of that punishment so that other factions don't have to face it down. Ettamor's Troll Hunters firing some volleys here into the Arthedain men-at-arms. Not the most devastating unit. You probably should be going after the dismounted Fornos Knights. And that's exactly what they're doing. Still the small matter here of these horse archers. Probably out of ammunition at this point. They're going to go into the backfield. They need to be careful about coming back through this way because of all the stakes the defenders have placed down. Black shots being chased away. a few units in behind enemy lines. Band of Brass Archers. They may have been victorious against the... I mean, to be fair, these Numenorian cohort are depleted. There's actually 2 units of Numenorian cohort in there, but they may have been victorious against Stats and Moors Troll Hunters, but this is a whole different ball game, and I would be extremely surprised if they were able to continue their demonstration of being such proficient warriors. Meanwhile, Woodland Protectors there. Woodland Protectors there as well, so actually pushing back Numenor, pushing forward and actually routing these units. So in the end, despite the damage that was done by the Demons of the Desert, the attackers simply didn't have enough left. And it may be a case of too little too late from the attackers in multiple ways in this fight. They may have just left their big plays just a little bit too late in the fight when they'd already taken too much damage. And that's what I'm starting to fear, because I've thought that the defenders would win this fight for a little while at this point, but the attackers have, you know, cast some doubt on that, but I don't know. Demons of the Desert, victory almost a certainty. Doing quite well against the Woodland Protectors. Could be a case of where they do technically win, but it's in the same way that Dale have managed to push through. 66 Pharazim Swordmasters. If it comes down to just like the dregs of units facing off against one another, there's really nothing that will beat the Pharazim Swordmasters. Dalian Royal Guard being engaged by a bunch of Numenor infantry, including some fairly healthy Royal Legion of Almenelos. Dalian Royal Guard will give as good as they get, but they're going to be overrun here by Numenor infantry. Blackwolds coming over here, revealing themselves as well for Rhudaur, not allowing these Blackshot Dragon Slayers to get any more volleys off, trapping them, and those big granite axes. I swear to God, every single time I keep telling people, like, if you're gonna just drop me a message first, don't ring me up for crying out loud. And yet no one ever bloody listens. Anyway, composure back. Witch Realm Enslavers. Blackwolds chasing off the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, and yeah, like Rhudaur sending over their elite units. I mean, this is the moment for Arthedain. With the elite units being sent elsewhere, they do need to send more in, but again, I think they've just left it a little bit too long. A little bit too long. And there goes a general. Don't think they have enough left, Arthedain, either. I mean, they're being contained quite well. Another unit of Blackwolds is over here after all. Frodrum Javelins are very depleted. Arthedain Berserkers are a bit bloodied up. So damage has been done, and in come the Troll Slayers, who are a pretty strong unit in their own right. There, however, are Kindred of Celeborn and Arthedain Rangers up on this cliff, who have been as yet unused, but now they will be used, and that should be enough to contain Arthedain from now until the end. Blackwolds assisting the Numenorians. Dalian Royal Guard finish. So yeah, it's going to be Arthedain, the last attacking faction left standing, completely unsurprisingly, given the way that this fight has gone. Someone has admitted defeat. Probably the Hobbits, given the fact that they've exhausted all of their resources. Horse Archers getting in behind enemy lines, causing a bit of disruption, stopping the Serpent's Fangs from firing, but those big two-handed Shotels proving to be very equal to facing down cavalry and melee. And they should be able to clean up this Numenor force, which got a bit too big for its boots and decided to try and counter-attack outside the settlement. There are some Swordmasters. Still 37 Royal Legion. Those Royal Guard from Dale did a decent job against them, but still, with Enslavers and Blackwolds on the way over here as well to help shore things up over on this side of things. There are the Wardens of the North trying to utilise those armour-piercing arrows. I mean, it does go to show the fact that Arthedain have still got, you know, this amount of troops left. The fact they have been rather hands-off in this fight so far. You could say it's understandable why, but ultimately I think as the attackers, you need to have more of a unified idea of what you're going to be doing in a 4v4, like in like a 3v4 or 3v5. you can afford to be a little bit more lax because you have so much more in terms of manpower than the defenders, that you can always be somewhat secure in the fact that you're always going to have more units to commit to the fight. That wasn't the case in a 4v4 like this. You've got a quality advantage, which means you have to coordinate it a little bit better than I think the attackers did here. And as I keep saying, if one of your allies is hyper-aggressive in a battle like this, like the hobbits were, in order to get the best chance of winning, you need to follow through with what they're doing. You can't afford to just let them do their thing and say, ah, well, I'll throw them under the bus and, you know, I'll be in a good shape later on. You will be in a better shape later on, but you won't be able to face down the entirety of the enemy team by yourself, regardless of how much you have left. It's just not going to work. Not only because of the numbers are going to be, you know, fairly skewed against you, but also you're going to be dealing with potentially 4 brains against your 1. There's only so much reacting you can do to that sort of thing, and that sort of micro that you're going to be facing. So I think it was a little bit of a mistake, to be honest. Also from the attackers, I think, probably a little bit of a mistake from Dale to try and shore up this fight as much as they did. This is the fight I would honestly be the most cautious about taking, especially against Lothlorien, because the amount of damage, the positioning of the skirmishes you can have on this choke point is the most damaging, potentially. And so I'm very surprised that Y2K elected to try and shore Harad's attack up over here, because it's the choke point I think you're least likely to make the most ground on efficiently in the settlement. The frontal one and the one with Arthedain I think are the better choices. As it was though, that was the thing. I think these are the mistakes the attackers made, and the defenders, you know, they just played solidly. That's all they've needed to do so far in this fight. And across come Numenor, converging as they are on the Arthedain lines. Arthedain's still got quite a lot of pikes left, which can be a bit awkward in a situation like this, but with the amount of numbers the defenders still have left, they should be able to just converge on them and destroy them. Marksman, Warns of the North, depleted skirmish units in the backfield. Trollshire Axe's victory seems certain. One of the reasons why I really do like Rhudaur are the axe throwing units. Actually, the Trollshire axe throwers can be such a useful tool. They may not be quite as devastating as the javelins in the faction, but they can be so useful against certain types of units like pikes. Not in melee, of course, but... and also the fact they can hide. Good faction to play in a free-for-all, I think, Rhudaur, just because of the amount of units that can hide and the amount of damage they can do quickly as well. A very potent mix in a free-for-all. And so it will be that Arthedain will be sent scurrying for the hills. And that will be that, I think. Dunedain Trollslayer still doing a bit more damage. It's a bit of a... that can't have been the Arthedain horn. I would imagine that was the Rhudaur horn, even though it sounded like it was coming from back here. That's the Evil Men horn, however, which means it must have been Rhudaur, surely. Blackwalt's defeat, a distinct possibility. Facing head-on against pikes, though. I think it's just a matter of time. What have we over here? Kindred of Celeborn. There are the Hashari Stalkers, firing into the fronts of those Numenorian cohort. Between the Hashari Stalkers and the Serpent's Fangs, it's a little bit of an awkward little force, this. It's not going to be enough for the attackers to go on to win this fight by any means. As soon as something serious comes their way, they will be dealt with. Could be the Kindred. Watchers of the Goldenwood were committed to the front line at some point, so I imagine they got suffered at the hands of the Demons of the Desert as well. Not entirely certain where Numenor are going. They're just sort of waddling around the battlefield with their elite units. As are Rhudaur with their enslavers. Don't really need to be this cautious at this point. They're probably trying to avoid the attentions of some of these skirmishers that Arthedain have. They're so depleted and so overwhelmed at this point. You can just get into the backfield like the Rangers are doing here, engage them in melee and then scour them from the field. Swords raised. There are the Arthedain pikemen. Numenorian cohort Yeah, I think the Serpent's Fangs should be able to fight their way out of this fight. I don't think there's enough cohort left. And the Serpent's Fangs certainly have fangs in melee. Not one of these archer units which will collapse. Although having said that, they are surrounded as well, which means their melee defense is probably suffering a little bit. Yeah, that Numenorian cohort might actually be enough to finish them off. Where did the Hishari Stalkers go? Are they just hiding? If they are just hiding, they should probably be getting into melee to help the Serpent's Fangs. I mean, there's going to be virtually nothing left of either side when that fight is done. Rangers in the backfield, pikemen are there. Smattenmore's Troll Hunters pushing their way through. And now the Numenor and Rhudaur elites, really elite units anyway, are coming forward. Arthedain Berserkers count, as do the Reforged Javelins, to be honest with you, but yeah, the Gate Guards overrun. Arthedain Pikemen and the Numinous Gate Guards fill exactly the same role. All of the Arnorian petty kingdoms have got this pike unit that is designed, you can only have one before the price increases. They sit in the middle of your line and do a really, really good job. Of those three, though, Wardens of Tir Gorthad, Numinous Gate Guards and the Arthedain Pikemen, the Rhudaur one is my favourite. It always seems to perform really well, and it's got that shield, which really does make up for a real weakness that pikes tend to have, especially the other Rhudaur pikes, the Dunman Pikemen, extremely fragile, of course. But yeah, Arthedain Pikemen for Rhudaur really doing the business on that front line. And really, Proxima just had to play the waiting game against Arthedain. Lothlorien used their skirmishers to good effect. Numenor with the infantry anvil for their team. And Mirkwood filling a similar role to Lothlorien. Ranged damage with archers. And I think the defenders, you know, they set their stall out quite well, I think. So you can't complain too much about that. Was that an admit defeat from Arthedain? I think it probably was, because the Wardens of the North would probably have fought to the death. There's only 10 of them left, so that wouldn't have been that much longer, to be fair. But they are finished. Arthedain admits defeat. Just waited too long. You know, and that's a lesson which a lot of players do tend to learn. If you wait too long, your allies will crumble, and then you'll suddenly find yourself facing down the entire enemy team, because you reap what you sow in the end. And I think the Serpent's Fangs are going to be overcome by the Numenorian cohort, so it goes to show what a capable unit the Numenorian cohort are. Even when heavily wounded, they can still get a job done. It's an interesting little fight, this. Not lore-friendly in the slightest, but it's a decent map, this. It always does tend to produce interesting fights. On this occasion, we saw the entirety of the fighting take place on the outer 3 choke points. And we didn't see the interior of the map used at all, as we have done in the past. But, I mean, if you're the defenders and you can see which way the wind is blowing and you can just constantly man the initial choke points and to this extent, then you're going to take it, aren't you? Especially with the vantage points that this map gives you in certain places for skirmishers. Rhudaur, Lothlorien and Mirkwood are all factions as well which have really, really potent ranged damage. The Elven factions from their archers, and Rhudaur, of course, from their javelins and axe throwers. And then Numenor with that bulky infantry added to the mix. It's a potent combination. It's a good mix. But like I said, I think the attackers are the part of this battle you can really dissect, because they got a few things wrong in the way that I mentioned. The Hobbits may very well have been too aggressive, but ultimately I think that's someone was always going to have to be aggressive and be the fall guy. I think it was other ways. I think Arthedain were too passive, as I've said. I think over here I would question Dale's decision to commit some resources over here to push through the choke point, which I think is the hardest to push through. I think if Dale were going to assist a flank, it probably should have been Arthedain. Or they should have just put all their eggs into the middle basket over here and helped the Hobbits try and surge through and try and push through with sheer weight of numbers as quickly as possible. One of those two things, but in the end, shoulda, woulda, coulda. And that's going to be the end. One Haradrim banner carrier all that remains, and he is about to be skewered by these battle-weary Numenorians, and there he goes.
This is a clear victory.
The Arthedain outpost remains in the hands of the defenders on this occasion. So, big thank you to Demon's Hunter for sending me this battle replay, and a big thanks to all the players for being involved. Hobbits getting the most kills for the attackers, which is kind of interesting considering they also took the biggest beating, but I would assume that comes about as a result of their Dunedain Rangers and their Proudfoot Protectors, the Ents chipping in as well. Like individual units like that probably really performing quite well, because their infantry almost certainly didn't get all that much done against a very well prepared front line. I'm assuming anyway, we won't be able to see the others all getting much of a muchness really in terms of kills. Not terrible kill counts to be fair. I mean, Numenor getting the lowest kill count on the map as a whole, but that's because they didn't have any ranged units at all. And as the defenders, of course, your bread and butter in terms of kills going to be your ranged units. He was just here really as more of a defensive option, and all the other three getting plenty of kills because they, of course, were putting more eggs into the ranged unit basket. So let's see what did the damage for Demon's Hunter, who got the most kills. That's not too surprising. He had the most advantageous position, and Dale also followed through with more numbers on that side as well as just the Haradrim. So yeah, it makes sense that they got the most kills. Only just though, in comparison to Mirkwood. Having a look here, Kindred of Celeborn, yeah, they got a really nice shot into some blobs there. 313, 243 for the Watchers. Plenty of kills on the standard Lorenar Archers as well. The Javelin's doing well, so they must have got some good volleys off because they're kind of basic in terms of the damage they do with their Javelins, the Woodland Protectors. Karas Galadon's Guardians, one of the real underperformers because they got immediately massacred by the Demons of the Desert. Spears of the Wood did quite well, but that's because the initial waves were just not solid enough to try and break the defenders down, so the Spears of the Wood did quite well against the lower tier Haradrim that were sent their ways. Swordmasters did decently considering the fact they were going up against units that were stronger by that point. And yeah, Lorenar Warriors also 376 kills, which is very good for a unit of Axemen, which don't tend to have the highest melee defense. So yeah, interesting little battle this. Not lore friendly, but still very interesting. As I said, I think a full week ago, in the Forlond battle replay by the time this one comes out, if I'm not mistaken. This past week I was planning on going back to 2 videos a week instead of 3, or at least 2 pre-records a week rather than 3, adding in more streams again, at least that's the plan. A little bit hard to judge that considering streams happen on at the time, and I'm currently running like 3 weeks ahead of schedule as it pertains to recordings. But that is the plan moving forward from here now. Mainly because actually doing 3 replays a week means I do tend to drain my backlog dry pretty quickly, whereas doing 2 a week is much more sustainable for the supply as it comes in. So that's the idea for the time being. Wanted to get back into doing a little bit more streaming anyway. Of course, the situation is very changeable for the reasons that I mentioned in the last channel update and the reasons I've been saying at the end of each video, because the situation can change pretty quickly in my life at this point. So that's the plan at the moment, but plans can change. By the time this video comes out, it may very well have changed, but we'll see. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.